Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making it full house. We're very excited. We have about 45 minutes. We're going to talk about fake news. Before I introduce our guests and myself, I'd like to get a sense of the audience. It's mostly students, it looks like. Are you all from Jaipur and surrounding areas? No, you're from all over the country, I believe, right? So can we have a show of hands for people from the southern part of India? Okay, is that one of the cities there? Bangalore. Okay, I'm from Christ University, Bangalore, so I don't know. One of the two principal fake news busting organizations that we have. And of course, Pratik Sinha runs Alt News. And both of these are, it's not fair to call them fake news busters. We should call them digital forensic investigators or something. You know, that's better. And then finally we have Trushar Barot, who's at the BBC, and he's the digital launch editor. And he has single-handedly launched 5 or 6 of their... Not single-handedly, he's got the might of BBC behind him, but he was instrumental in launching 5 or 6 language websites or services of the BBC's, which includes Gujarati and Marathi and Tamil and Telugu and Bengali, if I'm not mistaken. So and the BBC is really one of the leaders in busting fake news and understanding really what a newsroom can really do. And my name, of course, is HR Venkatesh. I'm building a coalition of publishers and platforms so we can tackle fake news and disinformation. Before I go to any of these people, I just want to raise of hands. Do you all know what fake news is? Should we just do a quick 1 or 2 minute definition as to what fake news is? Feel free to pitch in, guys, but fake news is essentially anything that is not true. Sometimes it is intentionally not true. Someone has published lies. Many times it's somebody by mistake, they've sort of forwarded something that was not true, especially, you know, your aunt or uncle or something on WhatsApp. It's very common that we do that. And fake news is a problematic term because it doesn't describe the entire spectrum of problematic information that we come across in our daily lives. So there's misinformation, which is by mistake spreading problematic content. There's disinformation with the intention. There's malinformation. Malinformation is sometimes even spreading the truth, but in the wrong context, in a deliberately wrong context, so that it has the same effect as fake news. But in India, this is the term we use, fake news. Many other countries, they don't use fake news, but in India we use it because most importantly, it's a term that everybody understands and is familiar with. So my first question, Trushar, I'm going to start with you. We're at Talk Journalism. We're a bunch of journalists here. There are a lot of students out there. Do you believe that journalistic organizations have failed abysmally in addressing the number one challenge that we have, which is negotiating the world of information?
Thanks for the easy question. So I think what's been happening, certainly over the last sort of year or so, and certainly this is true of the BBC, internally has been having quite a live debate about what is our role as a news organization in this space. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll try and talk a bit louder. Is that better? Okay. I'll just say that again. So I think over the last year or so in particular, particularly after the sort of the US election campaign, a lot of big news organizations like the BBC has been having quite a live internal debate about what is our role as a big, maybe trusted news organization in the world of fact-checking and telling audiences whether things that we have internally checked is true or not. Traditionally, what's happened is we've always had, very high standards of fact-checking internally as a news organization. But the normal process would be that we'd see a story that's being reported, we would do our own checking. If we felt that the story was not sort of strong enough, we just would not report it. And there'd be a big sort of internal conversation with our editors about the story in our morning meetings and so on, and then we'd make a call that actually this story is not worth pursuing because of X, Y, or Z reason. But up until quite recently, at least, that whole process has never been revealed to our audiences. Unless we actually report a story, they don't know of all the other stories that we've considered but decided not to report on. And I think what we're now starting to do is realizing that being a trusted news organization and just having content that we have gone through quite high levels of filtering and checking is not potentially enough anymore. That there is such an ocean of content which could be fake, semi-fake, not entirely clear how real or not it is, that I don't think we as a news organization can simply just step back from that ocean anymore. And that we need to participate in helping people understand what's going on. So almost like the versions of what Jency and Pratik do every day, that sort of activity of like very openly saying, this is what we've checked, this is what we've discovered is real or not. We're not at that point really of doing that same type of process, but I think we're getting there.
That's very interesting. So essentially you're saying that it's not enough for news organizations to say, trust us, but to show with every story why they should trust them. By saying, this is the story, this is the news, and this is how we reported it. These are our biases, these are our processes, and these are the tools we used. Let's talk about the guts of fact-checking, but also we have mostly students here, and I'm assuming and I'm hoping really that many of them will want to go on to become fact-checkers in their own right. And correct me if I'm wrong, you did not receive any formal training. Can you tell us a little bit of how you got into this? It's been 2 years, you've been phenomenally successful. How did you get into it, and why did you get into it?
So I have been active on social media for about 4 or 5 years, and I was looking at a lot of information that was circulating on social media, and a lot of that was that to my eyes was not true. And so I started fact checking on my personal Facebook profile and a Facebook page that I used to run, and I started pointing out, and Trushar pointed out that they started looking at it from the US election point of view, but actually we started looking at it from the 2014 elections. It is just that in the US elections it had a much bigger impact, and this is for the audience. In the US elections it had a much bigger impact because the whole length and breadth of the country had enormous access to internet in case of US. In case of India, what has happened is that starting 2016 with the arrival of Jio and the whole telecom revolution that has happened in terms of internet data, what has happened is that the internet access, the amount of internet consumption in India has increased by about 10 folds in the last 3 years. So which is why the issue is much more, which is why you're seeing people getting lynched because of misinformation, all these child kidnapping rumors. So that is one of the driving factors as to how many people have access to internet. And that is what we observed, that with the increase of internet penetration in India across urban and rural areas, there was a lot of misinformation that was being spread about, which was gaining enormous virality. I mean, videos would be shared millions of times with incorrect context. Images would be shared lakhs of times with an incorrect context. And that is when we realized that there needs to be a more organized effort in dealing with this. And that is how the idea of alt news was born.
So essentially anyone can get into fact-checking.
Yes, anybody can get into fact-checking. We recently did a 5-day-long training session in Google in Gurgaon. This was just last week, where we trained about, and Boomlive was also part of it. Boomlive is also organizing further events in other cities. We are just into the training bit as alt news, but we trained about 40 journalists of how to fact-check different things, how to figure out whether image is being circulated in the correct context or not, whether videos are correct context or not, how to look for information, how to look for data. So it does need a little bit of training, and of course we have had the experience of about 1.5 years behind us, but at least 50 to 60% of fact checking, where at least you get to the point that, okay, I should not share this. The whole point is that people are not circumspect, people are not critical enough towards the information that receive on WhatsApp. So you need, as individuals, you need to get to a point that, okay, I'm going to Google this, I'm going to sort of use reverse image search to find out whether this image is true or not. I'm going to use this tool to break down a video into individual images and figure out whether this video is true or not. And at least I'm going to come to a conclusion that, okay, there's something doubtful about this, and I'm not going to share this till the point that I am not entirely sure about this information. So that is where people need to get to as individuals, as fact checkers.
Jency, you've been a journalist, and it's really funny, I'm sure, from the audience's perspective. People who consume the news and information, to them there's no difference between a journalist and a fact checker, and really there isn't. But there is this thing in many journalistic organizations, in their minds, the people who work there, that fact checking, no, I'm a journalist. I mean, how did you approach it?
Yeah, so I think we met here last August, and at that time we were a few months old since the time we started covering fake news as an entire area, which we were not diverting away from and doing all kind of curations. We were entirely focusing on fake news. And I remember the conversation at that point of time about fake news being something which is new. And there are a couple of websites, and there was also SM Oxley on this panel as well at that point of time. And we were all discussing, what kind of shape this is going to take. And I do remember at that time, many of the mainstream media organizations did not take this issue very seriously. I'm talking about just 1 year back in August last year as well. And since this year, January onwards, we have seen what has happened because of rumors being spread and the entire lynching incidents that have happened. But yes, coming to your point about is there a dichotomy in terms of how you see fake news or fact checkers as separate from journalists? I think they should be one and the same. If mainstream media would have taken their responsibility of probably busting fake news and doing fact checks more aggressively. Let's also remember one thing, that boom moved into active fake news busting only in 2017, roughly about March and April. Before that, we were doing active fact checking. There was nothing called as fake news that we were focusing on. We were looking at fact-checking numbers, policies, announcements that were being made, and I keep saying this at multiple forums, and it's like one of my favorite stories, that I joined Boom on the day when two historic events happened. One was Donald Trump being elected to power on November 8th, and that day itself, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also announced demonetization. And after that, we have not looked back. I was put into it with one reporter handling an entire website, and we were fact-checking numbers, claims, and so many of the claims that they were announcing at that time. And the one reason why we could jump into it is because we found that probably mainstream media was not aggressively going out and fact-checking the numbers and claims that were being made. So I don't think there should be any difference between who a fact-checker should be and who a journalist should be. It's one and the same, and that's why I feel that organizations like BBC have a more robust system. Something that many of our organizations in India probably have not built over a period of time.
So essentially, fact-checking is baked into the journalistic process, and it should not be seen as different. I want to ask the audience, have you all received fake news on your phones? Can you lift your hands? Has it mostly been in any particular language? Is it in a local Hindi or whichever region you're from? All languages? It's a real mix. Is it mostly on WhatsApp?
At times you can see, it's very easy to figure it out if it's a fake or not. Because if you see letters, if any word is there, if for example any word is there, if you write in a normal writing, suppose you're writing a news, so you will write in a very, in a professional manner, right? But wherever if you will find the, fake news, the punctuation marks are wrong,
yes.
the alphabets are wrong. They will use mixed languages at times, okay, and provocative most of the times.
Yes, that's true. In fact, last year when we were here, we did a checklist of how to spot fake news, and the gentleman there is exactly right. Wrong spellings, wrong punctuation. Look for the author of the piece, Google the author of the piece, look for the website, Google the website. They make changes, they don't reference the changes. There are many ways to spot what fake news is. The reason I did that poll, Trushar, is because, fake news and really information disorder, as some people call it, is a problem that is most manifest in Indian languages. We're talking in English here, but really the problem is in all the languages we speak at home. And you've launched 5 or 6 editions in different languages. How would you say the BBC is approaching this?
So Probably over the last 6 months, the BBC, certainly World Service, which I'm part of. So BBC World Service is a global sort of department of the BBC that has 40 languages globally. So over the past few months, we've been thinking very hard about what more can we as a news organisation do that's generally trusted globally, beyond just doing our own journalism on our own websites and launching new websites. What more should we be doing, or can we be contributing? So one thing we're now actively doing in India is a sort of a project which we're internally calling Beyond Fake News. And it's coincided with the fact that we now have these language services in India, 6 language services, plus the English service. So I'll quickly go through them if that's okay, just in terms of giving you a sense of what we're trying to do. So later this year in November, on 12th of November, we're hosting a series of big conferences in Delhi and the 6 other regions of India that we have our own language services. So Lucknow, Ahmedabad, Pune, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Amritsar. And the idea is that we want to bring together stakeholders across India to really talk about how big the problem is, what are the emerging solutions, what more could the BBC do maybe to act as a bit of a convener to get these stakeholders together and maybe help collaborate with them in some way. The other thing we're doing is in the UK last year, the BBC launched a sort of a schools workshop where we sent a number of our journalists into about 1,000 schools in the UK to deliver like a workshop on how they can better understand where they're getting their digital content and information, and how they can be better digitally aware about what is real, what is fake, how they can talk about this more intelligently with their friends. And so actually we're now adapting this workshop for India in the 6 languages that we have. And we've just started piloting in Delhi, and it's aimed at sort of 15 to 20-year-olds. And actually today, if I could do a quick little advert, we're going to be hosting the first of a 2-part workshop from 5 to 7 this evening, and we'd love for...
Full correction to avoid a clash with the lyricist, it's from 3:45 to 5:45.
3:45 to 5:45, thank you. For anyone who wants to sign up, please go and see Prabjit, who's holding up her hand. So this is really our first attempt at really trying to test this workshop. So we'd love, particularly the students in this room, to come along and tell us what you think. Is this the right tone? There's going to be a lot of interactivity, some fun, some games as part of that workshop. And tell us if you think there's stuff that we should change. So your help would be great. And then the other thing we're doing is a sort of a hackathon, which we're hosting again in Delhi, where we're trying to bring together computer science students from IITs and other universities, and bringing them together with journalists and engineers from the big platforms like Google and WhatsApp and Facebook, and see if we can come up with some technical solutions. So again, if anyone's interested, please come and see me afterwards. But I guess this is just our way of thinking about what more, in addition to what we're doing, can we help with, establishing conversations, communities, working practices that would be really useful.
Always good to have you make an announcement that is going to go towards dealing with fake news. And it's not just fact-checking, as he was saying. Fact-checking is as important as digital literacy. Some people are using the term emotion checks as well, because the reason we share and we read fake news is because it appeals to our emotions. It arouses hatred, it arouses anger, and we share it for that reason. So, yes, fact checks need to take into account emotions as well. Pratik, I want to just take this in a slightly different direction. There aren't too many fact checkers in India. Part of the reason is maybe they didn't know how to fact check and you figured it out on your own. But increasingly there are ways of doing it, and there are organizations that let you take free tutorials on the internet on how to fact check. Is it because you're attacked? Does it require a great deal of courage? And I'm pretty sure you get more abuse than pretty much any other journalist. Can you talk a little about the role of courage or how you approach it?
Firstly, I don't think it's true that we get more abuse. I think multiple journalists, especially a lot of senior journalists from Barkha to Rajdeep to everybody, they get enormously abused. So abuse is not the issue. The issue is the field that we are dealing with. Most of the misinformation in India is political misinformation. Yes, we know that there's this new trend of child kidnapping rumors which are extremely dangerous and has led to people getting killed. But as far as volume of misinformation is concerned, most of it is political misinformation, and the motive is political. And when you're dealing with something which is political in nature, you are actually affecting either the ruling party or the opposition party in a certain way, and their agenda and propaganda in a certain way. So they are the ones who'll come after you. The ones in power who can really if we were to go wrong as a company, let's say financially, etc., then they can come after you and sort of create a lot of problems for you as an individual and company. So that is the issue, that the people who are in power are themselves part of the problem instead of, and they'll continue to be part of the problem, and which is why fact checking will always be a slightly dangerous endeavor.
Slightly dangerous, but not, I mean, if you're a journalist, you've got to be ready for some kind of danger, right? It's not just the soldiers who face danger. Okay. Jency, what tools would you need? Let's say there are a few people in the audience that want to try their hand at fact checking. It need not necessarily be political fact checks, but it could be, someone says, if I eat 5 almonds every day, I will never get cancer, something like that. What kind of tools, technological tools, would you use?
So, I feel that health fact checks and food fact checks are a bit more complex because, no two doctors will ever agree on what kind of treatment you should follow if suppose some food is known to be causing cancer. So it's a very difficult and a very complex area, and maybe that's where probably fact checkers like us will have to pivot at some point in how we can go into these areas as well and not just limit ourselves to politics. But if it is regarding anything that I receive on my mobile, I think the basic fact check that all of you all can do is you can do a reverse Google image search and check whether this image has been used anywhere in the past in for any other story. The other way, very simple way you can do is just Google search. I think 70 to 75% of anything that we receive on our WhatsApp helpline, which is usually inundated with a lot of claims and requests that come in saying whether this is true or not, what we found is that people have not even done the basic Google search. So what these days what we are doing is we are not giving them easy answers, because that would be actually giving them on a platter and expecting them to come back to us again and again for some of the really basic stuff. So we do tell them, why don't you Google with these keywords and search, if you search, then you will be able to get this. One very important tip that I can give to all of you here is, suppose if you're receiving a text message in your WhatsApp, what you can do is you can cut, copy, paste that and put it probably into Google or into Facebook, and Twitter if you're very active on Twitter, and you'll find the number of times the same message that has been forwarded across mediums. That will give you at least a sense, at least a proportion of how viral this has gone. If you can do that, then what it will prevent, and I'm assuming there are about 80 to 100 people here, if we are able to at least stop forwarding some of these messages and taking a step back and saying, there seems to be something wrong with this, because so many people are sharing it, let me not forward this. I think that will again make a lot of difference. There are these very small things. You don't really need complex tools that my team and Pratik's team are using, because that's for more complex fact checking. If all of you all start doing it, what will we do? So, but I'm saying that the really basic ones, the basic ones that will prevent you from spreading misinformation, that is available in your own hands. You don't really need to come to fact checkers like us for those very simple ones.
Right. So, that's a good note on which to open this up to the audience. But really, before that, a comment, which is the fake news problem cannot be solved by 1,000 Pratik Sinhas and 1,000 Jency Jacobs and Trushar Barots. It's really a citizens movement that is needed. So, it's really up to all of us to do our best. Can we have quick questions? I don't know how much time we have. You'll give us a time check, right? Right? So, please keep your questions short, no comments, and if I feel that a question has already been answered or can be answered somewhere else, I'll ignore it. Okay, so let's start with the gentleman at the back with the spectacles. Arijit, yes. And then 2 more questions, and the gentleman here and the lady there. Yeah, and the spectacles there. So 3 questions, quick. We can start with you, Arijit.
fake news. And one thing is about fact checking, which you guys are talking about. You keep your journalism story true to its facts. But if it's, what's the motivation of people, different kinds of people sharing fake news? If you could just discuss it a bit more.
Okay, so I'm going to restrict that to sort of where does fake news come from. I'll come to you for that, Pratik, but after the next couple of questions. The lady there in the spectacles, please. Yes. And this gentleman.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my name is Sonia Gavasis and I'm from Christ Deemed University. So my question is, like, we understand what fake news is, okay, like at this point of time. But what other than that? It can't be just saying that, this is what it is actually. Because what is its role in lawmaking, for example, for lawmaking? Because for the recent lynching incidents,
okay, the law. I'll just restrict that. Okay, where does the law come into the picture?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
like, more than just saying, this is not what it is.
Right. Cool. You, sir. That's okay. I'll repeat the question. It's okay.
Just want to know, is there any prosecution in these cases? Because one thing is just about finding, that this is a fake news. But have you been able to use a tool which is a dedicated tool, technologically driven tool, which identifies the source and then you have taken a next step of really kind of, filing a FIR or something on your behalf so that those sources really get demotivated out?
I'll come to you, Jency, to answer the gentleman's question. I will answer your question, but Pratik, where does fake news come from?
So,
No, one moment. Let's just get these answers.
So where does fake news, I mean, first one has to understand the motive of fake news. As I said earlier, most of the information that you'll get, there'll be a lot of Hindu ne Muslim ko mara, Muslim ne Hindu ko mara. There's a lot of misinformation which is meant as divisive. It's used as a tool to create divisions in the society. And the only motive can that be, the only people who can take advantage of that are a variety of political parties. So there is a motive to misinformation, and it is distributed in various forms. Number one, there are multiple websites. I don't know how many of you have heard of postcard.news. How many have heard of postcard.news? Yeah. So there are multiple of these websites which put out misinformation, but their motive is not just political, their motive is also financial, because these are really 24, 25-year-old, just fresh out of college, and there's also a case of not enough jobs being there, and they get into multiple of these websites. They create these content factories where they keep putting out information so that they can get ad clicks and they can earn money. Now, when you have to create so much content, you'll invariably put out information which is not correct. So that is one. And second, obviously, is WhatsApp, where you cannot actually track who's actually put it, because WhatsApp has an end-to-end encryption. There's no way to track, as to who's actually the source of information. And that is why a lot of people actually use WhatsApp, so that it is not possible to track them back.
Jency? I mean, he did say, of course, that you can't track WhatsApp, but is there a one-stop easy solution?
I don't think there is any easy solution, because the law is very ambiguous on what is fake news, right? There is no law against fake news. One man's fake news is another man's opinion. That's what politicians will always want you to believe in, because just look at the kind of support Postcard News has got the moment that their page was taken down by Facebook. Not for fake news, but for copyright infringement, very interestingly. So that's the kind of support they managed to get. I'm sure that tomorrow, if someone shuts down Alt or Boom, we will not have even one single politician standing up for us. Not that we are interested in that, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of where that support is coming from. But let's look at it this way. Both platforms, Facebook, Twitter, all of them, they all believe that they're not in the business of regulating content. They don't want to regulate content in a way in which people will accuse them, saying that you are trying to shut down one set of ideology and trying to promote someone else. But what we are trying to increasingly work with platforms and trying to explain to them as well, that if you do not bring down many of these pages, and there are many pages that the kind of work that all of us are doing, and I don't mean to say only one of us, but everyone put together, and even many of the other digital websites and newspapers and television channels reporting on it, it has created an awareness that there are pages that are existing on Facebook and there are Twitter handles who are far more powerful and have wider reach than many of us put together. And that reach is actually creating a lot of communal agenda, a lot of communal trouble. And there are many of these pages which are, which are following in millions of followers, which probably we can never even dream of. So I think the platforms are also understanding this. They are trying to figure out a way in which they do not bring about any kind of restriction on free speech, but at the same time also trying to kill their distribution. That's one of the projects that we are working with Facebook, where we fact check many of these posts that are put out on Facebook. And what Facebook promises is that once our fact check is put out and we link it to the tool, that they will kill the distribution by 80%. That's a more global number that they've given. And I've seen some of the stories once we have put out, yes, the distribution on those posts have come down.
All right.
Just add one thing to that.
Yeah.
Just adding one thing to that, which is where this becomes really difficult, is the sort of the grey news world, where legislation and also the platforms are really struggling to figure out what to do, which is there may be a statement that's made that's sort of half true, or it's driven primarily by opinion as opposed to facts. Like traditional fact checks are easier to do. You can just blatantly say whether something is true or not. But ahead of the election campaign, I think the real challenge is going to be, there's going to be a lot of grey news happening. And then as soon as you try and fact check that, you have to become much more nuanced and say, this is true, this is not true, this is what's not exactly right. So the BBC have a team called Reality Check, where we've started doing a lot of this with political statements, particularly around the context of Brexit. And they have to be quite nuanced in the reality check, saying the Prime Minister said this much is true, but this is not actually the case, and this is the real context of what's being said. But the problem with that is you lose 99% of your audience with that nuance, because they're not ready to accept that actually there's a lot of sophistication and nuance to a lot of this stuff as well.
Right. And to answer that lady's question, look, any effort to fight fake news has to be multi-pronged. I have a framework that I use, that I've developed, called the 5P framework. So the 5 Ps are, we've talked about some of them: publishers, so the media has to do its job; platforms, so technological platforms have to agree to do something, like WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter and Google. And then the third would be policy, so the legal space, whether the government should regulate platforms, whether they should regulate hate speech. How do you define hate speech? These are questions which have that can really impact people's lives. The fourth P would be psychology, or behavioral science, understanding how people understand information and receive information, and designing your communication accordingly. And the most important P, and I'm going to leave it at that here, is people. So it's you. For example, nothing can work unless there is really a citizens movement. And in that spirit, I think we've run out of time, unless we have time for this gentleman's question here. No, you know what? You can catch us separately. Pratik will add something. But just to close it out, Jency, your Twitter ID would be at Jency Jacob?
Genjack.
I think it's better to give the organization ID.
Okay, organization ID.
Boomlive_in.
At boomlive_in. Please follow the Twitter ID. They do stuff that is accredited. Please retweet them. You would be at Trushar. At Trushar, please follow his work, because it will lead you to discover what the BBC is doing in this space. And you would be at Freethinker.
No, at Alt News.
At Alt News.
ALT and NEWS.
ALT and NEWS, at Freethinker as well. Please retweet their work, because that's the only way we're going to fight this and successfully fight this battle. And follow me at HR Venkatesh if you want to know what I'm doing with this coalition and where it's headed. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that, but please come to us for your questions individually afterwards. Thanks so much, guys. And thanks for being such a fantastic audience.